had to get the
there
recording
he is.
started, and now it is. And yes, I am present.
Awesome. Well, first, thank you everybody for taking the time again today to join our meeting. If we can, Nate, could you help us out and do a quick roll call?
Give me just 1 second. So I'm looking up. I had all the names in order on the minutes that I circulated. Let me just pull that up. I had our current minute or our current agenda. Just 1 second. Okay. Nicole Bailey, I think I saw, was here. Nicole Bailey.
Yep,
Oh,
sorry.
yep, there you go.
I'm here.
All right, thanks. Let's see, Andrea. So I'm not seeing Andrea. I don't think she's in here yet. Let's see, John Connolly, I see you there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to highlight everybody as they're here. So Captain Leonard Dittman indicated he was not going to be here, but in his stead, we have Trooper David Hatchenberger.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. And then we have Trevor Forbes. Obviously, you are here.
Here. Yep.
Then we have Troy Hill.
Yep, I'm here.
Is here. Jim Howes.
Here.
Okay. Nicole Lawless.
I am here.
Thank you. Michael Pierce. I don't think he is here yet. Officer Prinsky.
Here.
Thank you. Brandon Rich.
Here. Here.
Okay, thank you. And then I think I just saw Michael Pierce just came in, did he not? Michael, you here?
Yes, I'm
Okay,
here.
thank you. Let's see, Jeffrey Reister, Attorney General's office. I do not see him listed here, so okay, I do not see Jeffrey here. I'm here, and then last is Joyanne. Are you here? There you are. Okay. Okay, so it looks like the only ones we're missing are Andrea and Jeffrey Reister. So I'm sure they'll probably pop in at some point.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Next up is just approval of our minutes from our last meeting. Do we have those kind of written down, or?
Yeah, those were circulated prior to this meeting. I hope everybody had a chance to look at them.
I think everyone did. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
I'll do the motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Awesome. Thank you.
Was that Troy Hill on the second?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So the first kind of order of business to talk about a secretary position, which would be effectively taking some notes during the meetings on votes, motions, and attendance and things of that nature. We can do a rotation, although I will say it would be very, very awesome if anyone wanted to volunteer to be our secretary, make things very seamless between meetings. Do we happen to have anybody who's willing to be our
I'm
secretary?
willing.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
willing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. That was easy. Okay.
Sorry, Trevor. So did we have a vote on the approval of the minutes, or was it just a motion a second and it just kind of sat there?
Yeah,
Did
we
need to
can
vote
do
on
it.
that?
Yeah, I guess we can do a vote.
Okay, real
yes.
quick. Hold on. I'll do it real quick. Here, hold on. All right. just one second. It'll come up in just a sec.
And Nate, on the voting on,
Uh,
I can't see what you see on your end is if we vote kind of ayes and everyone hits their little hand signal, and then we vote nays and everyone does their hand signal. Is that the easiest way for you to capture it?
Yeah, it's up to you. I know in our last meeting, we did this little poll thing that everybody can just go into and just vote like a yes or a no. And that actually does populate a report after the meeting so that everybody knows how it was voted, how many votes for a certain way. That seems the easiest way to me, but I'm open to suggestions if anybody has any other ideas.
Yeah, we can use a little hand for something like this. I think we'll start with the nays and the expectation there are none, and then we can kind of move on. Are there any nays on approving the minutes from last meeting? Okay, I think the ayes have it, so I think we're good on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So first kind of order of business, we'll have a discussion on our kind of public comment procedures. I think it's the public comment portion of these is really important. So it deserves a little bit of attention on on we do that. I think I'll start off with just a couple thoughts. One is to maybe on the website or something, but publish some time limits to kind of put some boundaries around it. Maybe a kind of a 2-minute cap on public on individual public comment. Is just kind of a starting point on that. And then as far as pre-submission procedures, having some kind of procedure where folks can, before the task force meeting, can reach out and say, hey, I'd like to make some public comments, and here's the general topic I'd like to talk about, which is effectively what happened last time. I thought that worked out really well. But that's just my general thoughts. Does anyone have any other ideas on kind of the public comment portion of it, longer time limits, smaller time limits, anything?
I think those are both great, considering, if you go to a committee hearing for the legislature, they have a 3-minute window for people to speak. And then they also request that you submit before the actual hearing. So I think those are both within reason.
Okay.
Yep, I agree in the 2 to 3 minute time range. But when you do testify at the Capitol, they also allow you to sign up. Pretty much any time before the hearing. So is there like an in-between we can take where, we encourage members of the public to sign up in advance, well in advance? That also helps us plan the meeting and timing, but time permitting, if there are additional folks who come, and didn't sign up, we let them speak time permitting and we keep those limits. So we kind of manage reasonable expectations, but also not close it, off to folks who want to participate. And then to that end, I would also suggest that we put the link out like on our website so folks can join, just like join directly. And then Nate will already have that list of sign up in advance, hopefully, so he will be able to call on those folks who signed up in advance. Anybody else can be time pending at yours or Nate's discretion.
Gotcha. And Joanne, and like, my understanding is, like, in your experience, there may be a time limit, but let's say somebody had a comment that elicited a lot of discussion and warranted, more than 2 minutes, that if someone has a public comment and then one of the members of the task force has some follow-on questions for them, that we can kind of extend that time limit. They don't necessarily get cut off, provided that it's something that everyone kind of needs to talk about. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it depends I think it's just going to be at the discretion of you as the chair, maybe with some guidance from Nate. But if there's a topic where we know we're going to get a lot of comment, like I assume once we get to the point where we really dig into rates later on, maybe we set special time aside on the agenda for that. But I agree. I don't want to cut people off directly at 2 minutes. And I know like Denver City Council does. But if you're testifying in the legislature, the testimony is different. And if the panel has questions, they can ask you those follow-ups. So I think that's a really good point. And, we should just try to be as flexible as we can with the public and, and getting that input. But I like that feedback for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrea, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think 3 minutes is good. That's usually what it is at the Capitol in public meetings. I also, in terms of like sign up, I agree with Joanne. Like there has to be flexibility around that. I heard from last meeting that it's not always super accessible to like know about these meetings, so people might find out last second. So if people opt to sign up ahead of time, great. But if they show up and just want to talk, I think that needs to be included as well.
And we might have folks who want to show up and observe, but not necessarily speak, which would also be another benefit of just pasting the link on the website, to the Google Meets.
So just an FYI to what we're doing as of right now. Obviously, it's been a little bit trial and error trying to figure out the best system that works for the most people. But as of right now, we're posting the notice for these meetings on the towing specific page of the Public Utilities Commission's website. And that references, the statute that creates the task force. It identifies the date and time. It indicates a link to the agenda that's been pre-circulated, as well as a link to a sign-up sheet. I set it up initially as a Google Excel doc, but then it ended up migrating to a Google Forms. And what it does is basically somebody clicks on the link in that notice on our website, and it takes them to, it's almost like a little quiz. And it basically, the person can list their name, their email address, and also whether they plan to public comment or they're just planning to observe. There's that option as well. There's also a little space where they can indicate if they have public comment, what those comments are going to be about, kind of a brief description. And then kind of based on some of Joy Ann's comments from last meeting, there's also a question in there indicating if there's any specific accessibility needs that this individual might have. So those are all available through there. I do have that report. We actually had 6 people sign up for this meeting. I think I've seen most of them trickle in since we started. But basically, once those reports come in, I then have access to their email, and I just send them the meeting information so that they can join in. So that's currently how we have it set up now. We can always evolve that process, but that's what we're doing right now.
Okay.
Real quick, do you see those when you during the meeting if somebody signs up like while we're meeting?
I've already done 2 since we've started.
Okay.
Awesome. Nick, got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there is a reason why we wouldn't publicly post the meeting link. I know some meeting sites have a limit on how many people can come or enter the meeting, but if there's not a limit.
Nate, I think you do have it posted, right? So anyone could hit the link and join, or is that not?
No, I think it was kind of a way for us to keep track, just for our own records on who's going to be involved. And so that's why we have this little sign up sheet where, and again, it doesn't matter who signs up, doesn't matter when they sign up. Like I said, there's already been a couple that have signed up while we've already been in session here. And as soon as I see that sign up, I immediately email them the link and they can jump right in.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I don't know if we want to evolve that at some point. But again, that's how we're doing it right now.
My thought is just do it till it doesn't work. So if we find that some folks, because of that setup, are not able to join, then certainly I think we need to address that. But I mean, right up until like the minute before the meeting, somebody, Nate, could fill that in and they'd be able to get a link and join. So it's not like 2 days before or something like that, right?
No. It's yeah. I got the link up right here on my other screen, and as soon as I see a new entry, I immediately send them an email with all the information.
Okay, gotcha.
So I would like to offer that we just put the link out there, and then if something is going wrong, then we make a change. And it's not because I don't think that Nate's not looking at his emails or whatever, but it kind of I don't want the public to think that they can't join a meeting because they didn't send something in advance, and I know different departments have done this different ways, like for different commissions and task force and stuff, but I would like us to just put the link out there because the link could be created in a few seconds, and I think it's, for the sign up, I'm okay if we ask people to go through the sign up process, to the extent that it's reasonable, so we can manage time and Nate can manage commentary, but I would like us to just put the link out there for the public.
And we could certainly do that. Like I said, I could see that leading to us having a lot more trouble trying to keep track of everybody who's here. And again, maybe not, maybe it's easier than I think, but that was the first thing that jumped into my mind.
I saw Andrea just
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I saw Andrea just noted as well that she'd prefer it be public, and I think I agree. Like,
Okay.
let's err on the side of being more, transparent and everything. And then if it turns an issue, we can obviously figure something else out. So, I guess to summarize, kind of what we're talking about here is a 3-minute limit, but obviously we can make extensions if we need to. Making the link public to the meeting, and then continuing with our current process of somebody being able to fill in that form via the PUC website to sign up for public comment. That's I think that's the summary, and wondering if anyone wants to make a motion to vote on that real quick.
Can I say just one more thing? Just something
Sure.
that's worked well with RTD meetings. So RTD, like you sign up and then at the end they say if anyone hasn't signed up, who wants to speak. And then the facilitator will ask please give us your information so we can record it to make sure that everybody's recorded, but there's just a different time for the people who haven't signed up so we can track them. So that's worked pretty well.
Gotcha. Awesome. Would anyone like to make a motion for those things we just discussed?
So you're going to have to correct me if I get the motion wrong, but I believe the
Oh, you're
motion is. So I'd like to make a motion that the task force puts the public link on its website when we have a meeting notice, and that our public comment is 2 to 3 minutes long. Are we doing all this in one motion? So sorry,
think so.
I'm totally out of Robert's
for sure.
rules.
You're good.
Okay, fine. And that we ask the public to sign up in advance, and anyone who would like to join last minute and speak can be at the chair's discretion, time permitting. Is that the right motion? Is that where we are?
I
Okay.
think that's great. And we have a second for that motion.
Second.
Okay.
Do
And
we
then,
need to clarify the timeline for the, because you were saying 2 to 3 minutes? And
Okay.
usually it's up to 3
Yeah.
minutes then. Can we clear that up?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I heard both 2 and 3, so I was being generous. What's on the table?
I say we go with 3.
All right. So then I would like to clarify my motion was for 3 minutes.
Okay. Awesome. We have a second.
I'll second.
I'd like to second
Awesome.
that. Yeah.
Awesome. And again, because I suspect this will be non-contentious, we'll ask, are there any nays? Okay. We'll assume that nays have it. And it passes. Okay. Thank you all very much. Next is one thing I wanted to bring up and kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, and then open up for comment and discussion. Currently, the CRS 40 10.1 403.5a basically annotates the duties and the powers of the task force. It turns out it's pretty narrow in scope, and it's also very clear, right? That we're to kind of discuss, opine, and analyze and talk about rates for towing. And those are also the things that we're asked to provide recommendations to the Public Utilities Commission on. And sometimes other things get conflated with that, and we can talk later about maybe expanding that, hopefully, or asking to have that expanded. But for right now, I just want to make sure everyone knew that, during our task force meetings and everything like that, we need to be cognizant of the narrow scope that the legislator has given us for the things that we're kind of supposed to discuss and recommend to the legislators. So that's just, I guess, my spiel. But does anyone have any kind of thoughts or questions or ideas about that general topic? That was easy. Okay. Oh, hang on. I think I may have seen it. Oh, I got Mr. House. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, so a little bit on, I guess, a little bit of history on the task force prior. One of the main things that the task force did was we gave the definition, or suggested the definition to PUC and ALG of what a non-consensual tow was. So, I mean, that was part of it. And I was reading this draft that was presented last week, and the legislator actually recommends in this draft that the task force can make, broaden that up a little bit on this draft, which on the second page, the bill expands the recommendations the task force can make to include, and then there's 3 bullet points on there. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to see that, because that does broaden this task force and what we can recommend and what we can discuss. Because as I'm reading through the remainder of this draft, there's items in here I think that are probably need some discussion on, just for the, because some of this is harmful does affect rates. Some of it affects consumers or owners in a negative manner. So, I would like maybe the task force to ask the legislator that we go ahead with this broadening here in their recommendations for the task force broadening responsibilities, and then give us some time to discuss as a task force a little bit more in detail some of these other items on this draft. So those are my feelings.
And just to make sure I'm right, Jim, you're talking about the proposed legislation that may go to the House floor in the, I don't know, next week or two, related to towing. Is that okay? Yeah.
Correct.
So real quick, I'll provide a kind of some context for everyone. So there's there's a draft out there, and so if anyone would like to look at it, we obviously would love to get it to you. But there's a proposed legislation that probably will go to the House floor in the next week or two. And one of the things in there is basically expanding the scope of the task force, to be able to talk about other things outside of rates, right? Rules around towing and how complaints are handled and all these other things that are very important. And so it basically expands the scope. I, for one, think that's a good idea, right? Rates are a pretty limited thing, and they've been adjudicated over many, many years. And so there's just not, frankly, a ton to do there. But there's lots of other things that surround towing that would allow us to do. And then that same bill, however, has a quite expansive list of other items related to towing that are tricky, I guess I would say, and require a lot of kind of discussion and nuance to prevent unintended consequences and things of that nature. And so I think we're saying, Jim, is basically if we could is respectfully request, which is all we could do, the legislature to do that, to expand our scope so we can discuss other items outside of rates, and then hopefully maybe hold off a little bit on these expansive rules to allow the task force to kind of do its job. Is that basically what you're getting at, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, and in this draft, I mean, the legislator does expand the scope. I mean, broadens our scope of what for recommendations that we can discuss and propose, but and that's the part I'd like to go to that legislator, and ask that we be given that broadening and their definitions, fine, and give some time to discuss some of the matters in the rest of this draft. So,
Right.
Yes, Trevor.
Gotcha. Joanne, I think you have a hand up.
I do. Thanks, Trevor. So I did want to point out that statute also gives us the authority or tasks us with advising the PUC around investigations and overcharges made by towing carriers. So that would be the other task or duty that we have. But you are right in that it is limited in scope. But I just wanted to put out there, while that might not be part of our mandated report in this summer, it is something that's under the purview of this body to discuss and make recommendations on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I will say it's not clear the mechanism for that working, right? Because the recommendation is easy for us to do. Well, not easy, it takes a lot of work, but it's clear what we do. We discuss and we get plans together and analyze, and we provide a recommendation. But the other things you mentioned kind of require the PUC to come to us to ask us for input. it's like more passive on our part. And so I think we can, but it would be nice if our scope was expanded to where it was like, no, literally, like your recommendations you need to provide include those things. Just not the current kind of adjudication process for complaints and stuff like that at least right now, doesn't lend itself to how the legislation is. I don't know if that is clear. It makes sense. But the process. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't understand what you mean by. I mean, is there an understanding, or have we gotten feedback from the AG's office that we can only discuss, vote, or make any recommendations on investigations of overcharges only if the PUC specifically asks us to? Or are you just talking about legislation that was passed last year about a very specific directive on rates?
No. It's not that we couldn't provide input. We just wouldn't know about them. So it's like the mechanism for doing that. So right now, if an individual, has a complaint about the towing industry or a specific towing carrier, they would reach out to the PUC. It's a pretty streamlined process. They reach out to the Public Utilities Commission and say, hey, I think this was wrong, or please look into this. Or frankly, they can just say, I don't know if something was wrong, but please look into it. And then the investigators at the PUC look into it. They reach out to the tow operator, ask for, information, records, all manner of items. And then they basically investigate. And then if they think something was done wrong or a rule was broken, and they produce a fine and stuff like that. But we as the task force wouldn't know that those complaints happen. And frankly, there's probably thousands of them. I mean, Nate could probably speak to this. There's lots. And so there's no mechanism for us to discuss or provide recommendations on an individual complaint or anything, unless the PUC asked us for it.
So maybe I just interpreted this differently, but I am looking at paragraph B as advising on general policy, because the PUC does make rules around investigations, procedures, and et cetera. So I wasn't talking about individual complaints, but policies and rules. The PUC is a rulemaking body. So that's how I had interpreted that. I don't know if
1 sec.
Nate or someone else has.
You might be right. Let me give me 1 sec. I'll tell you what, I have that paragraph. I'm just going to read it just in case everyone doesn't have it out in front of them. So it's paragraph 5. And it says the task force has the following duties and powers: to make comprehensive recommendations to the commission about the maximum rates that may be charged for the recovery, towing, and storage of a vehicle that has been towed without the owner's consent. The task force shall make comprehensive recommendations to the commission about maximum rates after July 1st, 2022, but no later than September 1st, 2022. And then it says, B, to advise the commission or the staff of the commission concerning investigations of overcharges made by towing carriers in violation of this title. So I think Joanne's right. Like, I think I interpreted it wrong. When I first read it, was thinking like, that means like a specific kind of overcharge. And that's why I was like, we would know about it. But I think Joanne's interpretation makes sense to me, that we can also provide a recommendation on their process for receiving and adjudicating these complaints. So I've been convinced. I think Joanne's right. So I would caveat what I said earlier, that I think that's incredible. Is anyone reading that and maybe interprets it differently than I now am and Joanne is? Hey, Michael, I see Michael's hand up.
Yeah, I'm interpreting it pretty much in a similar way, but more on the logic of the phrasing of it. What it does is it says what we are definitely empowered to do, but there's no exclusionary language. There's no limitations language in here, and so as far as I understand it, we are charged with doing recommendations with regard to rates and doing whatever investigations are needed. But in addition to that, there's no limitation language. So because there's no limitation language, I'm reading it as at our discretion, we can choose to discuss other items and perhaps make some recommendations.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess I would say two things. One, at some point you do have to narrow the scope. Like, it's definitely out of the scope for us to provide recommendations on traffic light policy or something along those lines, right? That's an extreme, but we do have to kind of narrow that scope. And then I would also say, kind of looking at like the legislator's intent in the law, and the new proposed bill expands our scope and annotates more stuff. And so I would argue that, like, if in fact they didn't intend for our scope to kind of be pretty narrow as is in here, then they wouldn't be producing legislation or proposing legislation that expands it more. And I may be reading the tea leaves, but it just kind of seems that that's why they're trying to expand it.
Yeah, well, to expand on what I was trying to say, with the mandate, we're actually empowered to do various things. And so with the empowerment clause, then there's some requirements that to build off of your other example, that we'd be notified of various important bits of information, and that also it would be under our charge that we're supposed to deal with those kinds of things. So, but I also agree that we would need to limit it, right? Because we're not talking about chewing gum on the sidewalk. But it seems like that's within, again, reasonable discretion on our part, because we're talking about towing related issues, and if we can keep our discussion scope there, that seems fine. But again, without the limitation language, any kind of limitation language in there, it seems to me like we do have a reasonably free hand. We just need to make sure that we don't go too far.
Gotcha. Understood. Any other thoughts on that topic? Okay. John, Mr. Connolly, see your hand raised.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, I agree with Michael on that. The limitations are not there. So I think anything involving towing, I think that it's appropriate for us to discuss anything involving towing, regardless if they like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, they can always ignore it if they want, right?
I mean, right.
So, okay. Got it. Any other?
Because I mean, after all, it's just recommendations, you know?
Yeah. Good point. Good point. And actually, just to dovetail off that, another kind of point to make, that just so everyone knows that we have kind of the authority to make recommendations, but we don't, like, the PUC doesn't work for us. We can't, like, mandate or require anyone to do anything, just to make sure we clear that up. We would hope that they would listen to our recommendations, and I suspect that they very much will. But it's a key distinction there. Okay. Next, I would like to ask to talk a little bit of the history of pricing. So we know we sent over some documents, and they are very, very long and very, very hard to read. But I hope everyone was at least able to kind of look through them and kind of get some context about the scale of these discussions over the years and everything like that. But what I was hoping is, Mr. Connolly has been in the towing business for many, many years here, and has been involved in the entire length of the pricing discussion, changes, all those things. He's kind of our subject matter expert. And so I was hoping that, John, you might be able to provide a quick kind of maybe 10-minute history of towing pricing, and then maybe open it up for questions from members after you're done. Would you mind doing that?
As far as how the pricing started, I mean, how far back you guys want to go? You want to go to the 80s, the 70s?
Let's go
to start in the 90s, the 2000s.
Let's go to the 2000s.
Let's go the last couple decades.
Yeah.
So the last couple decades. So it used to be PPI towing, private property impound towing, was the only thing that the PUC regulated. And that went through all the way until 2013, 14. In 2013, 14, we had many problems with some towers towing PPI towing, private property impounds, with vehicles over 10,000 GBW, and they were just screwing people to death. I mean, charging $2,500 to tow a little box truck, or I mean, it was just getting insane. So we got with the governor, decided to come up with a task force to kind of build something that puts a stop to those loopholes. So during that, we came up with the categories from 10,000 pounds and lower versus 10,000 pounds above. The different categories go all the way up to the 33,000 GBWR. So you're talking tractor trailers and everything else. So that way it was kind of dialed in so no one could take the loopholes. Then it got a little more intense because then we had the trucking industries coming in saying that law enforcement tows were also being abused. So then law enforcement towing also got put under the PUC's regulation. So that's why there's two categories now. You have a non-consent tow is not just private property towing, and now it is also law enforcement towing. So there's two subsections. So you got your private property, law enforcement. Each one of those rates are based completely on different statistics, different costs, different everything. Law enforcement towing versus private property towing is a completely different animal. Requires completely different set of rules, set of tools, everything. So that's why you'll see how private property is more on the lower side. It's more of a flat rate. Law enforcement is on an hourly because there's too many variables in law enforcement to have a flat rate. As far as increases are slow and always have been slow. It's about every 6 years. The towing industry gets an increase. Sometimes it's way overdue. It doesn't move quickly. It's been behind the times since it started. When the prices went into effect in 2016 and 17 era, they were already outdated. So those outdated prices in 16, 17 actually just got revised up to current about 6 months ago. So currently the rates that are in now should have been done back in 16, 17. They are about appropriate where the costs are. And we can go into a lot of discussion on how and why, because I know there's a lot of questions on, well, how come it costs less money for this or it costs more money for that? I mean, there's so many variables in towing. You're talking hundreds of variables. So if you had a precise question of why something is, please ask me, and I will try to get you on page and explain why, for, and how come. Is that what you kind of wanted, or do you want me to go a little more in depth?
No, that's perfect, John. And just to kind of not clarify, but expound on that a little bit. All these stuff John has been talking about has happened over many, many years with many, many hundreds of pages of analysis and documentation, everything like that. So it's a fairly complex, frankly, it's like towing rates is a very complex topic that we'll dive into and should dive into. But the key takeaway is it's not uncomplicated, I guess I would say. I just saw a question from Joanne to clarify if there's now a CPI increase every year. And in most of the categories, the answer is yes. And a lot of the reason that is helpful, and that's a pretty recent development, is what John was talking about. You have this issue, and it's not unique to towing. Many industries have this issue in which the government sets prices and needs to set prices in certain areas. But, expenses increase and prices are supposed to increase, but the government doesn't do that very often. So you have this stair step effect where every 5 years prices get so low and companies start to go out of business. And it becomes very problematic. And then everyone freaks out and says, oh my gosh, we need to raise the rates. And then they have a big study and they do all the work over again and they raise the fees to hopefully something that matches market conditions. But then they set it there and it continues to go for another 5 or 6 or frankly, sometimes 10 years, a really long time. And so the CPI increase was a way to basically say, look, we're not going to, every 5 or 10 years do this and have this kind of whipsaw effect in the industry. And so let's provide some consistency for consumers. So they kind of can look very clearly and say, okay, it went up this amount and here's why, right? So all this work went into establishing some base rates, and the CPI increase is a way to basically keep the rates with the market without being arbitrary. And for example, tow companies just saying, "Oh, I'm so poor, I need more money." It's like, well, these rates, we all kind of talked about these rates and hashed this out, and we decided they make sense. And the CPI increase is not perfect, but it's as perfect as you can get to track increase in costs. And so that's why that mechanism is there. And so that way the state doesn't have to go through the process every 5 or 10 years. It gives industry some transparency and some visibility into the future, as well as, consumers. John, you have some more thoughts on that?
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
did you
Go ahead,
say John or
Ryan.
Joanne?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead, John.
So the CPI increase for this year was frozen temporarily or delayed. Is that what I read? Could you expand upon that? And then do you also know what the increase will be once that goes into effect, I think shortly?
Yeah, I'll answer that question real quick and I'll turn over to John. It was just delayed. It is an administrative issue. So they base it off the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI increase for a very specific area. I think it's like Denver, Lakewood or something along those lines. And then the state of Colorado uses that information to create their CPI increase for the very local area. And when they first had the ruling, they made it in January, but it turns out those numbers just aren't ready by then. And so they had to delay it to March in order for those numbers to actually be correct and ready to make the CPI increase. Does that make sense? Awesome. Cool. Okay, John, you had something?
Yeah, to expand on that, I was against the CPI increase because it's a general increase. It could also be a decrease depending on what the market of, buying fruit and everything else is. What they don't account for is what insurance rates hit the towing industry. The insurance rates hit the towing industry extremely hard. And I'm going to give you my personal company's information. In 2016, I was paying $190,000 a year for truck liability insurance. $190,000. It went from there to $650,000, and that was zero claims. So zero claims, nothing wrong with my record, just the insurance went into a hard market. You got to remember, there's been a lot of studies going around that one tower is killed every 6 days in the country. Now, when that happens, it becomes one of the dangerous professions in the country, which takes your insurance rates through the roof, the exposure and everything else out there. And so it's drastic. Those just the increase in insurance alone justified double the increase that was given. If you start looking at other things, if you look at truck costs, things like that, the costs do not match it. The reason we settled for that increase on the CPI is because, you know what, it's better than nothing, because you can't wait 5 or 6 years for an increase when you're drowning. I've been in business, will be 49 years this year. It's our 49th year in business, second generation. I'm the largest law enforcement tower in the state. That increase in insurance alone almost put us out of business. We put everything our family had, and we are still recovering from that 5 years later. Just to give a little insight.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, John. It's tricky and is far from perfect. That is certain. Hey, yes. Nate, I see your hand up. Nate should have a lot of background information on this. Nate, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So just going on, I knew the whole recent kind of paradigm shift with the CPI adjustments was going to come up, because everybody is talking about rates and the level of them and things like that. And so it is as John described moments ago, where there were some pretty big gaps in rate increases for towing carriers. And again, we're talking in regards to, in most cases, the base rates are what tend to get adjusted the most. The base rates, kind of incidental fees like the after-hour pickup charge and release charge and things like that. But there were some fees that hadn't been touched in over a decade, like storage fees. Those had held pretty solid at $30 a day for probably since dating back to around 2010, which recently got adjusted. So the CPI adjustment idea came in actually as the result of a 2019 rulemaking that drug into 2020. And it was my understanding from what I saw from that rulemaking, and I wasn't involved in it, but I did kind of read up on it after I became the chief. And it looks like the idea was kind of how John described it, which is, instead of waiting, 5 or so years and then going through this lengthy rulemaking process, let's just make it an annual tweak to the fees and charges. I don't think I have a position on it one way or the other on if it's used or not used. But I just wanted to provide that additional context there, that this is something that kind of was explored by the commission with input from the towing industry, dating back, a few years now. And as I'm sure some of you saw from reading that history primer document that was circulated with the agenda, the CPI has been a consideration for those towing rate adjustments going back quite a ways, back to at least the early 2000s. So it is something I think we've always kind of considered. So that's something to think about. And then, Joyanne, just to your question about the pause on the CPI adjustment for 2021, it is as Trevor described. Basically, the commission recognized that the finalized CPI numbers, according to Colorado Department of Local Affairs' own website, aren't available till late February. And so basically, we're just waiting to see what those final numbers are. Instead of using an estimated number, we're going to go with what the actual finalized numbers are. And I think the decision the commission put out was that within 10 days of that finalized CPI number being populated by Colorado Department of Local Affairs, we will update the commission's website to reflect that CPI adjustment for the 2021 year. That's all I
Awesome.
have.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Mr. Pierce, I see your hand up.
Yes, I was wondering too whether there's built-in transparency, accessibility, and so on for people who are subject to the tows, so that when they're subject to the tows, they have access to the new rates. So I'm curious about how that filters through the system in terms of publicizing what the new rates are, how somebody who's being towed can find out about those, and just a chain of information, and so that the rates are transparent to the folks who are subject to tows.
So,
That'd be a great question. Go ahead.
Yeah. If I could jump in real quick. So I actually created the tow rates spreadsheet that is available on the towing website through the PUC. I populated that actually myself, and it took quite a long time to put it all together. But basically, you have a list of all the current rates in that first column, and it's identified by what the charge is for. So you have like base rates, you have them broken out by weight class, as John was describing earlier. Same thing for law enforcement order tows, storage, after hours fees, mileage, it's all there. And so it's all broken out, and it's all in this big spreadsheet that's available in a link on the commission's website, specifically the towing webpage. And it just says tow rates right there on a button on the towing webpage. And you click on there, and there you're in the sheet. And not only can you see the current rates, but you can also backtrack on previous rates as well. So we're trying to create a catalog just so people can kind of see where the rates have been, where they're going, things like that. That's why we created it that way. So that's where it's available.
Okay, so a quick follow-up on that. When people do get towed, they're going to receive a notice, and I'm curious whether there's a linkage between that notice and the site that you say where rates are posted.
Sorry, I'm not sure I followed that.
So when somebody gets towed, for example, one way that they could know where to look is just word of mouth. Right. It's there somewhere, but people aren't seeing, say, on the notice that's sent to them that their car has been towed, where to find all of these base rates. So that's the link where I'm wondering whether there's a website address that would be included on the notice that people who have been towed would receive.
So just so you know, the notice that gets sent out is a statutory requirement. It's under Title 42. And that's why we call it a statutory notice. It's between 2 and 10 days after a vehicle is towed. the towing carrier needs to run essentially a VIN check through Department of Revenue to find out who owns the vehicle, any lien holders, etc., and send out the notice to these people just in case they're unaware that their vehicle has been towed and by whom. It's my understanding the language in those notices is outlined in the statute. And again, these are Department of Revenue statutes that outline what goes in those notices. I can't speak to anything beyond it. What I can tell you is that the PUC does have a rule under 6509 in regards to what goes on a tow invoice. And so if somebody has access to a tow invoice, there is required to be an identifier on there indicating that if the vehicle owner or consumer has an issue with the tow, I think it says, problems or something like that, contact the PUC, and then it's got our consumer affairs line on there. Once we've made that connection, we of course, give the vehicle owner any and all information that they may need to navigate the situation.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate. Officer Prunski, I see your hand's been up for a while.
Hi there, and Greg's fine with it. I kind of had a question for John, and correct me if I'm wrong, Trevor, or correct me on the proper timing of this. You mentioned with the insurance rate increase, and that's an insane high number. Thinking on that, how much factor does the insurance play into with like CVA safety scores? Because speaking with experience, dealing with our companies or our cities, I guess contract tows, knowing that the standards are pretty high for the law enforcement tows, how much do they factor into increasing those rates?
Substantially.
Okay.
When you start getting into the law enforcement side of it, it's now you're in harm's way all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so those rates go up even higher, and your exposure, insurance companies call it exposure. You have so much exposure. They always say that. And I always fight with them because I show them the truck I have parked in the garage, and I'm like, it ain't got no exposure. Why does it cost me so much, right? But I mean, it's futile. But I mean, that's what they call it is exposure. So my rates go higher and higher the more exposure you have out there.
Yeah, so being a law enforcement tower, it really affects it just that much higher.
It's extremely higher, and there's a lot more in law enforcement towing that is not thought about. When you start talking about law enforcement towing, you're talking about losses, and people forget that you don't get paid on every tow. So when law enforcement calls for a tow, someone might not even show up to pick it up, and then you're stuck with it. Abandoned motorhomes and stuff. I mean, those things cost us money to get rid of. And so there's a lot of expenses there that the public doesn't see on the tower side when it comes to those types of impounds. Same thing with law enforcement, like state patrol. They'll have police holds for things that are they're in the court systems for 2-3 years, and so you're storing cars and securing them for 2 to 3 years with garage keepers, insurance, etc., maintaining those vehicles for them, preserving them for court cases, and then after they're all done, no one picks the car up, no one pays the bill, so the tower eats that, right? So there's a lot of those avenues that you have to explore when you're talking law enforcement, and there's a lot of different avenues there. I did want to circle back around on Michael and Riley there. Notifications. There's confusion between notifications. When your car is towed, a notification that's required in statute, that notification is designed for people who have abandoned their vehicle. That requires certified mailings. It requires getting information from the state of Colorado on who owns it, the last known owner's address, if there's lien holders, anything like that. When someone has abandoned the vehicle and has not picked it up, that's a different style of notification. That's kind of where the representative right now is going, and she's really messing up there, because that notification is more so for abandoned vehicles. And once you do that as a tower, you can charge up to $150 for those notifications, because it requires a lot of office work. If she eliminates that to where you do it immediately, you're going to add $150 to every consumer's tow bill. That's why we put the 2 days in place, is so towers could not take advantage of consumers. Now, the notification that happens the minute the car is towed, the tower is required to notify the local law enforcement within 30 minutes. That's step one. The other step is the property has to be posted. It has to have the tower's name, phone number, etc. So when you walk out of, and your car's been towed off private property, you have two avenues. You can look at the sign and see who towed your car, or you can call law enforcement who can tell you right away who towed your car. That gets you the information and gets you to the impound facility as quick as possible. The notification process is done by mail. Has anybody sent a letter lately? You're not getting a letter in 2 to 3 days. So even if they sent notification the minute the car came in, you ain't going to know for 2 to 3 days. So there's two styles of notification. You've got to be very clear on that and make sure everyone understands that notification process and why it is the way it is, just to help clarify you guys.
Yeah. So real quick, I got Nicole and Joanne in the queue. One thing I thought might be helpful, I think sometimes it's easier for us because we deal with this every day, but making the distinction between the types of towing, I think sometimes get confusing. So the term non-consensual has two different types of towing wrapped into it. Okay, so that's private property towing, in which a person abandons their car on private property, which is mostly where people abandon cars. Someone's in a fire lane, someone's in a handicap spot. It's a permitted property for employees, and someone parks there and isn't supposed to, and it's removed from private property and impounded. Then there's law enforcement towing, which is non-consensual as well, but it's different, right? It's at the request of law enforcement, and tow companies will have, instead of having an agreement with a property in that case, because these are happening on highways, the tow company will be under contract or be on a rotation list with law enforcement agencies. But they both fall under the non-consensual category because of the fact that the person isn't getting to have some kind of negotiation or ask for different prices, which is why the rates are set, right? Because the consumer doesn't have the opportunity to do that like they would on a consensual tow, in which, well, historically has been a free market system, right? Like if I want my car towed from my driveway to the shop, I call tow companies and get prices. It's more complicated than that because there's big trucking companies who have contracts with tow companies. So it's not just your car going to a shop, but the key distinction is a consensual tow is when the consumer, be it a business or a vehicle owner, has the opportunity to actually negotiate and shop around and make an informed decision. So I just want to make that distinction for everybody. Joanne, you had a question?
Thanks, Trevor. I had a clarifying question about the statutory notification fee, which is $150. So as I understand it, a towing operator has between 2 and 10 days to send that letter by certified mail. But I think a lot of folks are under the impression that, if your car, it has been in storage for more than 2 days, you will automatically get that $150 fee. So can someone clarify, is it that fee can kick in after 2 days, or is it only if the towing operator has done their due diligence per statute and notification? Right. Like you actually went through the steps, sent the certified mail.
Yes, you have to be able to prove that you did send those certifications out. But we put the 2-day waiting period because what was happening is towers were charging the $150 the minute it came in their impound. And we know they couldn't have sent notifications because you can't send those at 1 a.m. Sometimes the IDS systems don't even work like that. So we put that 2 days in there to protect the consumers, but we have a 10-day mandatory state regulation that says you have to get that. You can't just sit on it for 30 days, collect it in your storage and not send a notification. So we were trying to come up with a happy medium to get notification out to the lien holders and people that, and this happens a lot where someone's on vacation and they don't know their car was towed. So getting the mail to them is another way of doing that. But no, you cannot charge till you can physically show, as the towers, you can show that you did your certified mailing.
So does this mean like if I'm towed on a Friday, like am I going to get that $150 charge on a Monday since you can't? I mean, the post office isn't operating on Sunday, and Saturday would be outside of your normal business hours.
And then if they did the certifications out on Monday before you came in, they could charge you. But you can request proof of that. And the same thing if you get PUC deals with this a lot where they get the complaint about it. And PUC will ask the tower, I need your documentation to prove that you did it or not.
So can the consumer request that proof of the itemized receipt, or is it only the PUC that can request the records if there's a complaint?
No, the consumer can request it as well.
Okay.
But if the tower tells the consumer to piss off, then the consumer has to have a place to go. So they have to go to the PUC and say, hey, the tower isn't being cooperative, and I have this complaint, and then PUC can go in and actually force the tower to do that.
And I'm sorry I won't hijack time. I'm
no,
trying to understand.
You're good.
So I should have rephrased. Is the tower, like, are you legally obligated to give an itemized receipt or to prove documentation, or is that just best practice as to prevent a complaint?
No, we're supposed to give an itemized bill of every charge.
Okay.
So when we put a charge, you can't just say, your bill's $300 and guess what the charges are. I mean, it has to be broken down of what you're charging for. And
yeah.
Okay.
And real quick, I'll kind of describe the process in the event a tower did not do what they were supposed to do. And then Nate can jump in and say if I'm right or wrong. So in the event that a tower charged the $150 notification fee, but didn't go through all those steps, right? To check and also they also have to send letters to lien holders. So it's not just one letter. There might be sub-registered owners and lien holders. It's whatever information the DMV has. They send those certified letters out. If the Public Utilities Commission got a complaint and said, hey, even if the consumer didn't complain about that, they thought there was some other thing that they didn't like about getting towed, the PUC is going to ask us, like if they see they're going to we have to give them the itemized receipt, and they're going to ask us, okay, you charged $150, like where's the record of the certified mail? And if the tow company can't produce that, then that was a bad tow. And the Public Utilities Commission will always request the tower to provide a refund immediately to the customer in full, not just for that $150, for the entire tow bill. So if any part of the tow is wrong, the entire thing gets refunded. The PUC doesn't really have they can't really demand the tower does, but what they can do is give you a really big fine. And so towers, by and large, I think, and Nate can tell me if this is wrong, if an investigator, the PUC says, hey man, like your towing company messed up and y'all made an administrative mistake here, the tow companies, they provide the refund quite quickly, and they should, because they didn't follow the procedures and it was wrong and it was a bad tow. In the event the tower does not want to be cooperative like that, then the Public Utilities Commission has tools at its disposal to make that happen. Nate, is that an accurate statement? You want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you both covered it pretty well in response to her questions. In regards to the notification, yes, it is a two-part process. If it comes to an investigation at the PUC, if we see that $150 charge, the two things we'll ask for is, one, the IDS search. That's the record check that the towing carrier does through the Department of Revenue to see who owns that vehicle, who has interest in that vehicle, like a lien holder as well. And then so that's the first part. And then we also ask for proof that the certified letters went out, and that's easy to track because that has documentation attached to it. And so usually we get a copy of that DOR report and then a copy of the front of a mailing that went out, and those two things together usually are enough to substantiate the charge. Again, so long as the dates all line up with what's required in the statute. But yes, no, the tow invoice as well, that requirement does exist under Rule 6509. The vehicle owners are privy to a required itemized invoice of the charges, and there's a whole list of other things that the PUC requires to be on those invoices as well, such as that PUC related information on the tow invoice that I referenced earlier. So yeah, no, I think they both outlined it pretty well.
Awesome. Nicole, you've been waiting patiently.
No worries. Okay, so if I understand this correctly, the adjustments to the towing pricing were always behind the market conditions. And so in order to combat this, the adjustments were based on the CPI. The CPI is basically irrelevant to towing fees, it sounds like. So is there another data point that is as easily accessible as the CPI that we can use for the adjustments? I know this is going back to a topic that was about 20 minutes ago, but
No.
it's trying to keep us within that realm, sort of.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll provide a thought, and then John probably has some thoughts on this as well after that. You're right. Like the CPI increase is just it is kind of what you got, right? You might make an argument that you could. There's some data out there, and I'm sure there is on. You could find the 3 or 4 expenses for tow companies that are the largest, right? That have a disproportionate effect on their cost structure. I can tell you that's going to be wages, so labor costs, and it's going to be insurance. That's what costs the money. And then in John's case, because he has a large, heavy record to do police tows, trucks that are very expensive, like upwards of $1 million for certain types. And so you could get some data and every year create kind of a mini CPI, like a targeted CPI that shows how insurance has increased across the market and stuff like that. I'm not super hopeful that the Public Utilities Commission would be able to do that on a regular basis in an accurate way. I could be wrong there, and Nate might maybe provide some thoughts. But the answer is yes, but it would be hard. John, you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, we looked at that in detail, trying to figure out something. The CPI kind of follows your labor expenses, and those are one of your biggest problems. So it's not ideal, but it does help with the properties and the labor. It's close. It's a little low, but it's close. I mean, we're talking. I did a study for the last 9 years, looking at that. It was about 5% low. You know what? 5% is better than no percent. I mean, that's the problem. When you're not getting an increase for 5 or 6 years, that's not cutting it. So we figured, you know what? Let's try this. This will be our very first year with the CPI increase on law enforcement. So it's kind of weird to see it. I mean, we don't have a lot of experience in witnessing the increase. So I think after a couple of years, we might be able to have a little more data to put on the table there to see if it's working good or not.
Yeah. And just to add to, just so everyone's kind of aware, that there's another really big expense. So the main expenses for tow companies are labor, which, as John mentioned, does kind of follow the CPI. So that's helpful. Insurance expense, and that's the one that's the most volatile, frankly, and unpredictable. And then a third is rent expense, right? So you have to have property to safely store vehicles and keep them secure and all these things. So those 3 things are really the main drivers of tow companies' cost structure. There's obviously many other expenses, but those are the 3 that kind of are the biggest kind of levers, I think. So
Fuel's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, you put fuel at $5 a gallon, we got big troubles. Right now, my fuel bill right now is $20,000 every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So just follow up quickly, is there a national trade organization for the towing industry?
There is a national towing association.
Is this data that they would be willing to put together?
They don't have any data because if you go state to state, it's completely different. It changes from state to state. What property costs here versus what property costs somewhere else. About the only thing that's staying stable across the countryside is the cost of the equipment. That's about the only thing that is staying probably the same across the country. Everything else is different. Wages are different across the country. Wages are different across Colorado, depending on where you live in Colorado.
Yeah. But that Nicole, that's an interesting point. And in the coming months, I think that's something we should explore. Like, is there a more, fair, direct way to kind of measure, specific costs, and in a way that can be transparent to the consumer as well, right? That's the one advantage of the CPI is like consumers can look and it kind of makes sense, right? And so I think we should look at that because there may be a more elegant, accurate way to do it. And so I think we should, as a group, look into that in the coming months for sure. Mr. Hill, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I concur with what John said. And I'm nobody's best friend right now because I'm in the fuel business, but I'm familiar with this scar tissue on insurance. We actually were forced to join a captive this year because just going to the straight market every year for insurance, what's happened on the reinsurance and the nuclear judgments, mine was more significant. My rate increase would have gone from about 700,000 to 1.4 million. And that didn't address the umbrella because I'm in hazardous materials. So the CPI covers the wages, but it doesn't address the accessory items. And, trucks have gotten 15-20% more expensive. I can't imagine what one of his rotators costs, but I know it's more than that.
It
Thank
hurts.
you. Any other questions on rates? And I'll be honest with you, I'll stay on here as long as people need. I mean, this is our main mission here to talk about rates and stuff like that. So any questions anyone has on types or amounts or anything, please ask. Okay. All right. So real quick, there was, I wanted to kind of go back to what I think Jim was mentioning earlier about the proposed legislation. Just something for everyone to kind of think about and chew on as you're thinking through this. There are some things in that legislation that Jim mentioned that could be really problematic that I think you could argue is slightly out of our scope. But I think we kind of need to talk about, for example, if that legislation was to pass, tow companies could basically no longer remove cars out of handicap spots. And so folks with handicaps that are in handicap spots, like, kind of can't park there, right? Because anyone can at that point, and there's basically no consequences for it. Which I don't think was the intention, but it's an example of something that is kind of unintended, I think. In addition, like reserve spots, for example, on a private property. Often in apartment complexes, the property manager will assign someone a parking space. It does have the spot's not handicapped, but they assign them that spot right in front of their doorway because they need that accommodation in order to get in and out and all those types of things. And this again would have that same problem where it's effectively illegal to remove somebody from a spot they're not supposed to be in. And that has some issues. Some people might think that that's okay, and some people might not. But everyone kind of needs to think through that a little bit as we're discussing these items. There's also some issues. Speaking of rates, that kind of basically say that if you do consensual tows and non-consensual tows, you have to charge the same rate. And as John will tell you, that's like it's physically impossible to do that. Like I think John would have to have a billboard that's like 900 feet by like 1,000 feet. In order to list his rates like that. And it would cause some towers who do consensual towing and law enforcement towing, which is non-consensual, to stop doing law enforcement towing. Our feedback from any law enforcement agencies is law enforcement agencies already have a really hard time having enough good towers out there to respond to these incidents and clear roadways and keep the public safe. And if you have, call it half the towers in the state decide, well, I can't do that anymore because it'd be illegal because I'm doing consensual towing also, that produces a real public safety problem. And so I want everyone to kind of just think about that. And maybe when this proposed bill comes out, read it in some detail. If anyone's interested in the draft, I think there's a copy floating around somewhere. I'm sure we can get our hands on it. But something for everyone to think about. And Jim, saw your hand up.
Yeah, Trevor, on, following up with all the discussion on the rates and everything, but, at the beginning, I guess I'd like to make a motion that the task force asks the legislator to go ahead and broaden the task force scope as they had stated on page 2 of this draft, and then give us at least 3 months to go through their proposals to make sure that we're not harming the consumer, the owner of the vehicles, the industry, and the safety issues that you brought up. So, and I think it's just an ask of the legislator to give the task force some time. So that's the motion.
So happy to just to recap on that is basically I guess a request from legislators to consider continuing to expand our scope to where we have more things that we're required to recommend to the Public Utilities Commission, and then second on the expansive legislation that's being proposed right now, to ask them to maybe hold off and let us as a task force evaluate all those concerns and come up with some recommendations and kind of solve the problem within the task force that the governor appointed. Is that correct?
That's a correct assumption of the motion. Yes.
Okay. Do we have a second for that motion?
Can we have point of order? Can we have discussion before?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Please do. And Andrea, I just saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable at all making a statement like that or pushing that. Like one reason is I don't think this task force should expand its powers until there's a more balanced representation here. I don't know if anyone here has been non-consensually towed, but I think there just has to be people who are more at risk, who have been towed, who've experienced this, and we just don't really have that representation. So I don't feel comfortable expanding any powers of this task force until at the very least that happens. So
Mr. Hill, I saw your hand up.
Hi, I've had my vehicles non-consensually towed after they've been hit by several law enforcement agencies.
I have also been towed, unfortunately. It's not a fun experience.
And as the representative basically for Colorado Motor Carriers Association, I represent a lot of people that have been non-consensually towed.
I still just I don't think like there's enough representation on this task force to expand powers. I just don't feel comfortable with that at all.
Okay. Just real quick, Andrea, would you elaborate a little bit when you say expand powers? I guess maybe we're on a different page. How do you mean that would be expanding our powers?
I'm understanding from what James is saying that the ask is to just ask legislators to allow the task force to be involved in more issues beyond the scope that's in the legislature right now.
Okay.
So I'm not comfortable asking for that. I don't think that makes sense to me.
No, what I'm asking is just for the legislator's scope on page 2, they're broadening the scope in there, and just to follow that, not broadening it further than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wouldn't want that to happen.
On the draft, you don't want that to happen.
I would not. And I wouldn't ask them to not move forward with legislation either.
Okay. Understood. Nicole, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't think that we need to ask them to broaden the scope of the task force. Like we said before, we can give them recommendations. They don't have to necessarily implement them when they find them to be irrelevant. But I don't think that we need to broaden the scope of the task force to include something in our recommendation. So that's my 2 cents.
Gotcha. Thanks, Nicole. Joanne.
Hi, sorry, I have a barking dog because Amazon is outside. So if I need to put this in the chat, I will if he gets really loud. But speaking of jumping the gun, we do have different representation on this task force as a result of last year's bill. So I think it would be premature for us to be making any recommendations to the legislature, which would be outside of our scope, particularly because this bill that we're speaking of hasn't been dropped yet. It's not public, it's not finished. So And I also just, so I concur with Dre that we should, let the legislature kind of do their thing, at least for now. And I also just wanted to note that in the last PUC rulemaking process, when our rates were increased, the administrative law judge actually was pretty clear as to what our scope is. And I do want to respect that legal opinion. So I am kind of concerned that if we get into the weeds on legislation not related to rates, particularly because we'd be talking to legislators and not the PUC, that we're kind of like we're pushing it a little bit. But at the very least, let's wait until a bill is public and it's finished before we weigh in. So
Understood. John, I see you got an hand up.
I don't know. I have mixed emotions on both sides of it. I mean, if in their proposal or their draft, it just says it adds rules when the PUC is amending rules, which before it was just rates. So it's kind of cool to see that they're wanting us to help with rules. I mean, because if we could have at least our say in rules, that's always been a problem before. When we see a problem and say, hey, there's a loophole here that towers are abusing, we need to close it. Before we weren't allowed to do that. So, I mean, I kind of like that, having that. And so most of in this room, you can look at my PUC record. I have many PUC complaints, but they're not from consumers. They're from other towers. So I'm the asshole tower in the room. I'm against towers that do it wrong. So that's where I come from. As far as the way that draft is, I don't know. I don't know if we can give the commission our suggestions. There's nothing in there that says we can give the lawmakers our suggestions. I mean, that's going to have to be them that want to give us that power, or us wanting to express wanting to be in there. I mean, if we don't want to be in the middle of that and we want to let legislators make whatever laws they want to make without our input, I guess that's where we're at, that crossroad. Do you want to let them just make rules that make no sense, or do you want to have some input on what they do? I mean, if we find problem areas, it would be kind of nice to have an avenue to go there to show where the problems are. Like I said, we're on that crossroad right now. That's all I have to say.
Gotcha. Brandon, I think you had your hand up, Mr. Rich.
Sure. I mean, I guess it's almost if we wait until a bill drops to ask to opine on it. I think a lot of times it's late. By the time we could schedule a meeting and discuss it, it could run through the legislature quicker, than we could schedule a meeting. One, two. I mean, I don't know that any, all we're doing is offering suggestions basically. But I mean, the more that if the legislature does our job, then really our task force is, will become moot at some point, right? Depending on what legislation, what they pass. What are we going to be recommending if it becomes codified? Then, I mean, the PUC is going to have to follow that and not a recommendation. So, and I would just say, I'm kind of a intermediary because, we have to utilize towing companies so that way we can, protect our residents' rights, but we actually, it hurts us every time somebody gets towed out of there. I mean, we may make one resident happy because they're paying for a spot, or, somebody's parked in a handicap space or something like that, or an accessible space, or somebody has requested an accessible space that we provided for them and somebody's parked in there. But when we tow, somebody's upset and we're not benefiting from that financially. So, I kind of feel like when I've been on the commission, it's really been kind of like a referee position between the two sides. But I do think there's a pretty well balance, and I do think that they expanded this task force to make sure that they felt it was balanced. So that's just my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay. Nate, Mr. Riley, I see your hand up.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is, first off, I saw that Mr. Howes put forward the motion. Did we have a second? I think we jumped into discussion before we might have had a second. Did we have a second?
Well, I'd say, well, let's finish up with your comment, and then we'll see if we have a second.
Okay, fair enough. So the thing I was going to comment on is I'm sure the writing's on the wall with this legislation this session. Something is coming. The train's already left the station. I'm sure some of us have already probably seen a copy of a draft. I know some of us have probably already seen some of the media stories they've been running on this. There is going to be something this year. There is something coming. And so I guess, you know, we're either going to have to react to it, or I get everybody being anxious and wanting to do as much as possible. And I totally understand that. You know, everybody's excited to get to work and try to do things that'll be beneficial. But at the same time, this is still a newly, for the most part, newly created body, a lot of new members. And so I don't disagree that kind of sticking to our statutory mandate is probably the best idea, at least in the interim. Now, once we get past this first report, which I think is probably what we should be focusing on between now and September, when that first report is due, you know, going beyond that, after we kind of have somewhat gotten settled on that aspect of our responsibilities, you know, then I think things could potentially open up. But for now, I do kind of agree that we got to kind of stay on track, at least until this first report is done, was my comment.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, though, the legislation in current form, if it passes, there really won't be much of a towing industry to regulate or to provide recommendations on, to be candid. So it's not a small piece of legislation that has, you know, tangential impacts or anything. It's kind of sweeping. Just a thought there. But so Jim put forth a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Mr. Pierce is a second. I guess let's move to a vote.
No,
Saying no.
sorry,
hold on.
that wasn't a
And
second.
could you repeat that motion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
in the first
Michael.
place?
I'm sorry, Michael. I thought you raised your hand. Apologies.
No,
Jim?
I did. It was just I was thinking it deserves more discussion versus going straight to a vote.
Okay. You have any thoughts? Let's share.
Yeah, well, the main thing for me is that that the task force could fulfill two kinds of roles. One is to discuss the legislation, whatever the legislators are okay with us seeing, and then as a body vote on a recommendation, and that would exceed our mandate, and that would put the moniker of the task force on a recommendation. And that's something that I feel similarly to Dre about. I'm not yet comfortable with the balance of representation to be okay with the body sending a recommendation with its moniker. The other part of that, though, is that some of the feedback, to my mind, is super valuable, and to the extent that any of us are involved in advocating or discussing or commenting on the legislation when the hearings start, I think we're all going to be more informed if we're discussing these issues, and so that we each understand the different kinds of issues that come up with the possible language that's aimed at achieving various goals. So I'm also reluctant to say let's just table this until after the legislative session occurs, just because I'm hearing lots of valuable information that would update what I would want to see in this bill. So for my part, I would like the discussions to continue, but that the task force not put its name on any recommendations. Leave it to the members as individuals to testify at the hearing and not put the task force name on anything.
Understood. Joanne.
I was gonna concur with Michael, and I just wanted to emphasize that nothing prohibits any member of this body from testifying or lobbying. We just don't necessarily put the task force name on it as a whole. I also think that, like, I have a sense we have some disagreement on some of the issues. I've personally learned things I didn't know before. I'd like to keep learning, but I also feel that if we were to make, again, recommendation on legislation that's not out there yet, and that recommendation weren't unanimous or near unanimous, it would undermine that recommendation anyway.
Okay.
So it might not be in our best interest. I do think there is value in continue to having these discussions and learning from each other. But if I in any way suggested that individuals shouldn't be having conversations or testifying, I apologize, because I never want to imply that, that any individual like here, should have their right to free speech and public engagement,
Right.
infringed upon. So I
Right.
just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. John.
I just want to make sure that everyone's understands something clear here, that we should probably within ourselves clear the air on when I hear things like, I don't know if there's proper representation or it's not equal, or I'm a tower. I'm a second generation tower. This is my life, right? Everything that we talk about here affects my entire life, my entire family. But it's very important that everyone here can be open about what it is. All right. And you guys are going to learn me real quick that I am open. I say bad words. I sometimes slip. I've cussed at senators. I want everyone to be open. And when you say, hey, there's a problem here. Okay. We have this happening. We're seeing this happening. We have to address those problems. We have to be comfortable with each other to say, as a group, this is the problem, and how do we address the problem that is good for both sides? Okay. We have to make sure that we protect the consumers, but we also have to make sure that there is a towing industry. It has to be both. We can't just screw the tower, all the consumer, or screw the consumer, all the tower. All right. It has to be fair across the board for all sides, because there's a lot to the industry for the people, and there's a lot of the part of the industry that screws people. Okay. And there's a lot of loopholes that we've closed over the years to prevent that. And I just want everyone to feel comfortable here that it's just, I don't want to get into the, constant battle of them against us type of thing. I don't want that. I really want this task force to be working together, bring our problems to the table, and let's discuss them intelligently and make good decisions across the board for both sides, or any side. Doesn't matter which side it is. Doesn't matter what the issue is. If it's towing issue, let's come up with a good solution that works for everybody. Okay. I just wanted to say that.
Gotcha. And we'll take a few more comments, but I just want to make sure everyone knows that we had a motion, and so we're going to ask for a second. If there is no second, then we won't have a vote. If there is a second, we will have a vote. And so I just want to make sure that just if one or two individuals are like, I really don't like this, if someone puts forth a motion, then we'll ask for a second, and we'll do the same thing on the other end. If somebody has a motion, we'll do that for them later, right? So I guess any other comments or thoughts? Andrea.
I just want to agree with Mike. I think if folks want to lobby or advocate or whatever individually, but and I want to acknowledge there are power dynamics, right? There are people who profit off of this industry. There's people who don't, and in this table. And I don't think it's in the interest of this whole task force to be bringing something like this forward. I think that's in the interest of individual representation here. So I don't think that makes sense to move forward with. But
okay. Anyone else? Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question that's running through my mind is, knowing that the governor was appointing people to go on the towing task force and reviving the towing task force again, what was the point of sponsoring legislation in the near future while convening the towing task force. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't either, but I don't have any insights either. I don't have an explanation for that.
Thanks.
John.
Well, the towing association is already got their lobbyists and lobbying against that, and they have, meetings set up in the future and stuff like that. I'm not too concerned about that. I don't see where. I guess I don't see where the task force can help that. And I mean, it would be nice if they would give a group of people like the task force maybe the opportunity to work on that. I think this group here would make a hell of a lot better laws than what I've been seeing. That's just my opinion. But I mean, here again, I don't know if we even have the ability to do that.
And that wasn't a precondition, it's just a question I had in my mind. I have no idea what the proposed legislation is, but it was definitely surprising that while being asked to represent the motor carriers on the towing task force, we also find out that there's some proposed legislation coming down the pipe for towing. It just I didn't understand both at the same time.
Right. And really it's I understand what they're doing, and the industry understands what they're doing. They're they want to go after private property towing. The problem is they've just put everything all non-consent in one basket. And unfortunately it's going to fail that way. I mean, they need to concentrate on what their goals are, and they don't listen to the association on what the goals could be. But here again, that's really not the scope of the task force at this moment. I mean, I think what Jim was saying is he would like the task force to be involved with that. And that's how I took Jim's comment. I mean, I kind of agree with Jim that yes, it would be good to have a group like this maybe work on it. But it's not relevant. I mean, we do have the industry's already working on its avenues. So, I get it. I see where I can see Jim's point at one side, and I can see the rest. I can see everyone's point of view.
Yeah.
Really, we don't have any legal obligation or anything like that to do any of that. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you would do a motion like that. I mean, we could send a letter from the task force. How I understand the motion is you want to send a letter from the task force saying, can we be involved? In layman's terms. Is that how everybody else is getting it?
That was my interpretation, but we should ask Jim.
Okay.
If that was what his.
Jim, is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't. It was only asking us to give us time as a group, as a task force that was appointed by the governor, with some of the, give us a chance to maybe help with the recommendations or help, just recommending on this legislation, making sure that it's achieving the things that it's intending to achieve, because I don't believe some of this is. So.
Well, I guess then the question would be, does this body want to be involved with that even? I mean, if the body doesn't even want to be involved, then I didn't even know why we were wasting the time with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think John brings up a broader question, right? That, do we as a task force want to help craft stuff and everything, or do we not? I guess that's kind of the question at hand. But just to summarize, I think Jim's motion is for us as the task force to ask the legislators to allow us an opportunity to provide some input on the legislation. So I think that's the motion. And I guess unless someone has any new and very unique arguments or anything, I'd like to kind of move forward and move on to some other topics. But does anyone have any new thoughts? Michael?
Sure. I was hoping to turn what I was suggesting into just a slightly different version of what Jim is proposing, which is that the task force be involved, but that we perhaps move as close to consensus as we can get discussing this. But then again, we're not putting the name of the task force as a recommendation of the task force, but rather after we come to a consensus, then each of us as individuals can weigh in as individuals to the legislators. So what that does is it allows us to actually try and work on this and address some of the issues that I'm hearing, and come up with productive solutions that could potentially work and make it so that the goals of the legislation aren't conflicting with the towing industry. But at the same time, because we're so new, and there's the residual worries that we're not including as many voices as we might like, that we hold off from coming to an official conclusion. So I'm hoping the goal is to respect Jim's request, and so be involved, continue discussing, try and come up with some recommendations, but then leave the rest to the individual members.
Okay. Mr. Hill?
Thank you. Maybe to restate, if the proposed legislation contemplates changing something that this body is tasked with recommending, I don't understand what the point of both is, right? If this is a stakeholder group that represents the towing industry and consumers, and then, you know, if the proposed legislation is to change something that we're all tasked with making recommendations on, I don't understand what the point of both of them are. So, and knowing the legislature as well as I do, they really, really like having stakeholder groups be involved with legislation. If for no other reason than it's more than one person's voice or more than a trade organization's voice. It's actually a well-rounded group of stakeholders. So pardon me if I'm not being eloquent enough, but I don't understand if the legislation contemplates changing something we're already tasked for recommending, what's the point of having both?
Ms. Rusha? Am I saying your name right, Joanne? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, it's Rusha. So there's a difference, I think, between asking the legislators to hold off on legislation until we've completed our report, which would be asking them to hold off for a whole year because session ends in May, and asking if we can participate or have a meeting on pending legislation. And it sounded like Michael might have made a motion to amend a motion on the floor. And I'm sorry to ask for clarification again, but I mean, and while we're at it, I'll just throw it out there. Why don't we invite the sponsors of the bill to come speak with us? And that we would, does that, would that address your concerns, Jim and everyone else? Because I do want to, I definitely want to respect folks in the industry who want to have this opportunity and also want to have us, you know, like the body to have an opportunity to discuss legislation, but we don't even have legislation that's public to discuss. And I'm sure it's being amended as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, I would welcome the sponsors to come in and, you know, discuss, you know, maybe the items that you think are not accomplishing what they're thinking they're going to accomplish.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So we need to do something. All right. So I'll just quick summary and what's Jim, and I'll get a thumbs up from Jim saying, yes, that is my motion. Then we'll see if we have a second. So effectively, the towing task force would ask legislators to involve us in the process. I don't think we need to provide any specific demands or anything of them or anything, but just ask them, hey, we'd like to be involved as a task force. And that's the extent of it. Is that correct, Jim? Okay. So I think we understand what the motion is. I have a second from Troy. Is that right, Troy? Is that right? Okay. Okay. So we have a second. So let's go to a vote. Let's start with the ayes. And use your, will everyone put your hand up, your real hand, not the question hand, because that might get confusing.
I can read off everyone's name and hear their vote if that's easier.
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe numbers right.
Yeah, I have them all. If everybody can hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, Bailey.
I go by Nicole, but I'm gonna vote in favor.
Okay, so sorry, I'm doing this by last name if that's all right. It's that way I can do it in alphabetical order. Andrea,
No.
John Connolly,
Yes.
okay, in place for Leonard Ittman, Trooper Hackenberg,
Yes.
Trevor Forbes,
Yes.
Troy Hill,
Aye.
Jim House,
Aye.
okay, Nicole Ellis,
Yes.
okay, Nicole Pierce.
Michael
Oh,
Pierce.
excuse me. I was looking at two different names at the same time. Sorry, Michael Pierce.
Yes.
Officer Prunski,
Yes.
okay, Brandon Rich,
Yes.
okay, Jeffrey Reister, I don't believe is here still. Joyanne,
Aye. Yes.
okay. I think that just leaves me. I'll go ahead and do an aye as well. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 ayes, 1 no, and 1 not present.
Okay, so the ayes have it. Like I said, it'll be quite simple, and we'll circulate that to everyone as well, so you can take a look at it. Okay, let me see what else we have on our agenda. Okay. Okay, so almost forgot. We do have some motions that Joyanne wanted to present that she circulated. And let me just say, I appreciate that, Joyanne. Circulating motions ahead of time is, I think, very helpful for everyone. So that's awesome. So first, Joyanne, if you we've all read them, so it should be pretty quick. But kind of one by one, go through your motions. We'll take a quick vote. Look for a second. Take a quick vote, and then I want to open it up for anyone else who might have a motion as well. And then after we get all that done, then any kind of final questions, comments from any of the members, and then we'll turn it over to public comment time.
Awesome. Am I okay to go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, please.
All right. Thanks, Trevor. Okay. So at first, I want to preface the first motion. I'd like to say that I came up with all these ideas, but I really was just borrowing from what other task force and commissions have been doing lately. So I want to give credit where it's due. The Colorado Disability Funding Committee has done this with their website we're about to propose, and the Attorney General's office has adopted a lot of these steps in one of their task force. And so I just was trying to figure out what, I was influenced by what I think is working. But anyway, so my motion is to create a specific web page, for the towing task force on the PUC website that at minimum includes, but it's not limited to, future notices of meetings, including agendas and supplemental documentation. To the extent that the documentation exists and that it's reasonable, I want to add any historical agendas, meeting documents, and video recordings that we think would be beneficial, for the public. Instructions on how to make requests for reasonable ADA accommodations, which I think Nate has done a pretty good job of accommodating so far. And then also instructions on how to make a request for reasonable Title VI accommodations when applicable.
Okay. Sounds super clear. I think it's a great idea, but as the chair, I shouldn't be doing the seconding. So do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Okay. And I'll ask if we have any nays, because I suspect it will not be many. Do we have any nays?
I have a question.
Sure.
So directly to Nate, who is our access point for some of this, is there the availability for this added webpage in the first place?
Thank you, Nicole, for asking. Yes, there is. And in fact, I actually had a conversation with our in-house IT guy not even a day or two ago about just this thing. And he seems to think it would be fairly easy to implement. I believe we would probably institute it as kind of an offshoot to the towing webpage on the PUSIS website. So basically, we would just have a new button there with all our other buttons, like for towing rates and apply for towing permit and all the other buttons we have there. And it would just read Towing Task Force, and it would basically just be a repository for all this kind of information. So it could have all our agendas on there. The notices could be there. You could have the recordings of our meetings would be there. It basically would house everything. So I actually think it's a great idea, and it's definitely feasible.
Awesome. That's a great point. Actually, we should. I'm going to do a little caveat to the motion, these next four motions, and I'm going to make sure Joanne's okay with it. That they're all kind of requesting the PUC or recommending the PUC does A, B, and C, because we can't really tell them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seemed pretty big or grandiose of us to be directing what this organization puts on their website. So I had some concerns. Sorry, I've lost my voice.
That's all right. Okay, so do we have any nays on that motion? Okay, the motion passes. So Nate, it sounds like Nate's already on it, and he'll check on the rest of it. And good stuff. Okay, Joanne, the second one. There were three, correct, or four?
4, but I'm going to withdraw my fourth one.
Okay.
In the interest of time. And I think we've got it. I think we have it covered. So the second motion is about digital access and the ADA. As a matter of background, last year, the legislature passed a bill that requires all state and local government websites and any digital services be fully ADA compliant and comply with WCAG standards. There is a ramp up period to July 2024. The Polis administration was ahead of the game when the bill was passed, and they've done an amazing job of making sure digital communications are ADA accessible, and OIT has been great about it. So I'm going to venture a guess that Nate's already on this, but so pending the last motion, I would also like to put a second motion on the table that we just direct Nate or ask Nate to reach out to the appropriate designee just to do that spot check on the new page to make sure that we are compliant with HB 21-1110 right out of the gate.
I'm just at pure curiosity. Have other government agencies in Colorado already been able to completely implement that already?
Yeah, so some of them were already in compliance before the bill was passed because it was an initiative of the Polis administration to make sure that our websites were accessible. But not all, agencies have different departments. Some, documents are stored online, old PDFs, things that aren't readable. And so I would say most of our communications, like maybe 90%, are already compliant already. And this motion is just to ensure that out of the gate, we're using best practices. So, just so that we've got that box checked right now. And I'm going to guess that anything new, getting put up, with the assistance of OIT or any internal IT department is probably already following that. But I'd be a poor representative, I think, or advocate for people with disabilities if I didn't bring that up.
Well, to be honest, we can't tell them what to do, but it could be that, our recommendation is just one other little thing that they're looking at that they're like, okay, we were being a little lazy. Maybe we should be less lazy, and it could get it done faster. Right.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm not an expert on WCAG standards, so it could be that we are already. I'm talking about, if we are going to potentially set up a web page to host our documents, just that we kindly ask Nate to get that compliance feedback from IT or whomever is going to handle it at the PUC. I'm pretty confident they will anyway, but again, I'd be a poor representative or advocate, if I didn't bring it up.
Awesome.
And I should disclose, I did lobby on that bill.
No problem.
I'd really be bad at my job if I didn't bring it up.
Any questions on that? Do we have a second? Oh, wait, hang on. I'm sorry. John.
I'll give you a one. I didn't even know that was a thing. So thank you for bringing that up. And then, yeah, I'd second that.
Thank you.
Joanne, do you provide any consulting to businesses to make sure we're doing all the things we're supposed to do?
No, but I do have resources. If you're interested.
Okay, I
can-
actually will reach. I
Yes.
actually will reach out offline. about
Yeah,
that.
some of my colleagues do that. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, do we have a second? All right, we have a second from Mr. Connolly, and I'll go ahead and ask, do we have any nays? We do not have any nays, so it passes. Great. Okay, what's next, Joanne?
Thanks. So the third motion is pretty simple. I just so I want to put a motion out there that when we have recorded meetings, whether they are in person or they're being recorded in remote format like this one, that we either automatically enable closed captioning or similar technology, or we ensure that the end user can enable that technology, whether it's live or post-haste.
Okay. As a practical matter, Nate, I don't like our current setup. Do we have the ability to do that?
So funny enough, I actually just took a webinar earlier today on this exact subject. And it's my understanding people can, so right now, anybody who's involved in the meeting could, push the little button at the bottom of the screen, CC, and closed captioning will come up. It's my understanding there's even additional languages that you can select for that closed caption feature. So that is something we have available right now. In regards to kind of post meetings, so like the recordings, I don't know that it backtracks, but I did ask that question to the people who put on the webinar, and it was an internal department webinar. So I did ask that question about getting that closed captioning on recordings of meetings. They said they were going to get back to me on that. There might be a secondary or a third-party software that those recordings can be fed into to create that if it's necessary. So we're kind of exploring all these different avenues at once.
Okay. So maybe motion to request PUC to try to do that.
Yeah, I can amend my motion to request that the PUC provide closed captioning, live and post haste to the extent that technology allows.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
And I think it was muffled, but I think Andrea was a second. Awesome. Okay. Do we have any nays? Okay. That motion passes. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Joanne. Really appreciate that. Okay, now, do we have any additional motions? And if not, do we have any additional kind of questions or topics for discussion or anything that anyone would like to bring up? Mr. Connolly.
I just had a question on how we were doing on the emails.
So that actually was something I was going to bring up. It's my understanding all the alerts have already gone out. I think they went out within a day or two from our last meeting. So this was an email that came out to all of you on the email I think we're currently using for you from our one of our deputy executive directors of our department. Her name's Ginny Brown. And I see that some of you have seen those emails and responded to those emails. So I've seen those kind of coming in. I was just going to encourage everybody to make sure you check for those. I can hold on a second. I can tell you exactly when those all went out. Like I said, it was like a day or two after our last meeting. Yeah, I think they all came out on, I want to say it was the 27th, which looks like it was the day after our last meeting. So if you can go back and look for those emails, I'm pretty sure they all went to the right place. If you haven't received one or you can't find that email, because it's basically a form you just need to sign and return, and then they issue you the email and you get all the sign-in information, like the email address and a temporary password, and then you basically just have to go in and set it up like anything else. So I see that some of you have already done that. I was hoping to get everybody to do that, maybe hopefully by the end of this week. And that way that can just be our one repository for all information. And so, yeah, just shoot me a quick email if you didn't get that or you haven't seen that or you can't find that.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Nate. Okay. Anyone else? Any other topics? Okay, so at this point, why don't we move over to the public comment portion? And Nate, I guess you can, if you have that list, you can kind of just call out the names and we'll get started. And real quick for our audience here, we're going to limit public comments to 3 minutes. Nate should have your information and names already. So we're looking forward to hearing from you.
So I believe there was only actually one person, because again, through our sign up process, there was an indicator where you could click if you just were observing the meeting or if you wanted to provide public comment. I think there was only one that came in that requested public comment, and that was Troy Porras. So I'm not sure if I'm looking to see if he's still present. I see Tony Porras on here. I don't see Troy. But yeah, no, there was about 7 or 8 people that requested the information. I'm happy to read off the names. I guess you could just make a general call for anyone who wants to make public comment.
Yeah. It looks like we don't have a super long queue. So I think we can just kind of open up. And do you have any public comments out there? Okay, going once, going twice. Give it a couple seconds. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity. Okay, doesn't look like we have any public comments, so that'll conclude this meeting. Thanks again, everyone. Our next meeting, we need to get that scheduled. Sorry about that. I believe, Nate, remind me, I have a bad memory. We talked last time as a group about doing, I guess it was the first Wednesday of every month. Is that what we kind of penciled in?
I don't know if we actually ever settled on something, but I know Captain Dittman had requested that we make it, at like a specific, kind of rotating time so that everybody can kind of plan ahead in anticipation that it will be a time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does make sense. I guess maybe this is the easiest thing to do. Does anyone have any kind of on a regular basis that you're like, I know that on Wednesdays between this time, I am never available? Does anyone have any kind of thing blocked out that we should make sure we're avoiding at all?
I would be hesitant on the first Wednesday. I have a lot of meetings that first week of the month.
Okay.
So we've gone on the second and the third of Wednesdays of the month, I think thus far, or maybe the last time.
Oh yeah, you're right. This is the second Wednesday. I'm struggling.
Right. I'd be hesitant to schedule it for the first Wednesday. And I think last month we were on like maybe the third week of the month. Even if we went every other Wednesday, I think I could probably make it work.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. The first week of months, just sometimes that first week's crazy for sure. And I just saw Andrea Spezza. She said the second Wednesday works for me. What do we think about, we can always adjust if things change, but just plan on the same time, second Wednesday of every month. Just keep it kind of consistent. Does anyone have any significant issues with that?
Okay. Second Wednesdays of the month are a 4-hour motor carriers board meeting.
Ooh, what time does that usually go?
It goes from 8 a.m. to noon.
So if we start at 2 p.m. like we did today, would that work for you?
Yeah, that would probably be adequate. Yeah.
You may have to load up on some caffeine, but I got faith in you. Awesome. Okay, so let's do that, Nate. Let's schedule for the second Wednesday of March for our next meeting, and we'll just, informally plan on continuing with that cadence. Obviously, we'll adjust later if we need to.
Okay, so I have that would be March 9th, 2 to 4 p.m.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay.
Could I just make I guess, informal recommendation or request that maybe we, for those of us that are scheduled through the day, like if it's 15 minutes till, if we could open that public discussion point up a little earlier, because I think otherwise we're not going to be able to all be able to hear those public discussions. And as a person who's appointed to be an advocate for that, I really do want to make sure I have time, already again with my voice, but that I have time to hear those public appeals.
For sure. The other thing we could do, just again, just kind of informal thought, if we find, because sometimes these things go along, we may have some hot topics that people disagree on.
Right.
We'll go for a long time. Great. And so what I could do is just kind of pencil in that, like, look, if it looks going long, let's take a pause, make sure we have public comment, and then carry on later. That also helps, people who want to provide a public comment can kind of predict, they have schedules too, right? So they can kind of predict when the public comment period is kind of going to be. So I think I'll actually do that next agenda. I'll put kind of a hard time for public comment. And if we bump up to that, we'll do public comment and then we'll carry on afterwards. I think that.
Thank you.
that makes sense, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your month, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.